Welcome to Telltales. I'm Mike Nicoletti. Every week, along with my co-hosts Jason Wallace and Hunt Lawrence, we bring you the cash flow memo. Get it at telltales.us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive deep into energy, technology, and healthcare. So download the memo now and get started.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
We're going to do exhibit A, B, and C very quickly here because we have much more interesting things to cover this afternoon.
Exhibit C, world oil supply demand update, I think, is on Venezuela. Venezuela's small, doesn't even make the list of supply here. It's under 1 billion barrels a day. But the fact that the U.S. is boarding shadow fleet tankers is really interesting to the oil market. And interesting, I mean, like Brent was $61 this morning. It's up about $3 because it got down to 59. WTI generally trades about $2 under Brent. So this is an unexpected rebound. I think what the market's focused on is that if you want to sanction Russian oil, because there's no ceasefire in Ukraine, or Iranian oil, because they're unwilling to give up their nuclear ambitions or long-range missiles, you can rely on secondary sanctions, which is to persuade the Chinese or India where the oil's going to not take it. Or since all the oil is moved in what they call the shadow fleets, these are tankers that are full qualified for insurance, haven't been regularly dry docked, flying flags that are not registered. In other words, they put up a Panamanian flag, but they may not be registered in Panama. Under maritime law, you can board these ships. What the U.S. did with the first ship was to take it to Galveston, where they have an offshore oil loading facility, and they've basically taken the oil. One of these ships, because they're old, they're probably not worth more than about $8 or $10 million, maybe less, maybe $6 or $7 million. Probably worth about scrap value. The cargo, however, these are million-barrel ships, a million barrels of oil, $60 million. So they're not insured. Normally, tankers, regular trade, that you get cargo insurance. These are insured in effect by the country that is producing the oil. So Venezuela is now $60 million because the U.S. has taken that oil. I don't know. Maybe we credit into our petroleum reserves. I don't quite think what the U.S. government's going to do with that oil. And then you take the ship to an anchorage somewhere, and it just sits and rusts, and it's under some kind of guard. If the U.S. did a lot of this with these shadow tankers, there would be a more significant reduction and a quicker reduction in production from Russia and Iran, and it would put oil back in the 70s, I think. So it's something to watch. Exhibit B, which is the gas market, the cold weather has been terrific. The market for 26 was down a little. I think what's happening here is, if there were a ceasefire in Ukraine, Europe would use more Russian gas, and that would be a negative for gas pricing. It doesn't look as though there's going to be a ceasefire anytime soon, but there may be an oversupply developing of LNG. I mean, Qatar is always building more capacity. The U.S. now is the largest exporter of LNG, but with the Trump administration moving permits to expand and whatnot, the U.S. is now the source of most of the increase of LNG supply. There is a limit to LNG demand. Most other things, you have to have a terminal that you can bring the LNG into and turn it into gas. And so the price into Europe now is around $9, got as low as $8. The way to think about that, if gas is $4 in the U.S., costs about $3 to turn the gas into LNG, so I guess you to 7. An LNG ship to take the cargo to Europe is $1, probably 50 cents to regasify it. So it was getting kind of touch and go at $8. $9 is $1 more, but I think the thing to watch out for in the next 12 or 18 months is that trade getting upside down. In other words, well, someone who has a contract to purchase LNG is going to take a loss when they take account of all the costs to get the United States gas into Europe or all the way to Asia. The Asia price index is called JKM, Japan, Korea, I don't know what the other one stands for. That generally trades at least $1 more than Europe because the transportation to get there is $2 as compared to getting LNG to Europe for $1. It gets us to Exhibit A. Nothing new to report here. The healthcare premiums for 20 million people are not going to be subsidized. Clearly, there's progress here. Now you're more often than not seeing reference to the fact that the deficit for the fiscal year we're in is going to decline by $500 billion. But people are noticing that. To make progress beyond that is going to have to come on expenses. And of course, the biggest expenses are Medicare and Medicaid. So I think more work on healthcare costs is what we can expect. We're now into a year where we're going to get a new Fed chairman in May. The inflation reading last week was pretty good, about 2.5% or so year on year. More rate cuts in the Fed funds rate are likely. How that impacts the 10-year Treasury is going to depend on supply and demand for U.S. Treasury bonds that index is based on. And the fact that the deficit's going down is good news. I think the gap between the repo rate and the 10-year bond can't be all that great. Shows with regulatory support, hedge funds, banks, and whatnot will lever up to buy the 10-year bond and they make the carry. But that remains to be seen. In other words, if will our 10-year bond, which is around 4.10 now, go down as quickly as the Fed funds rate? I think we're going to be doing predictions later. I think a fair prediction is we'll go down, but not as quickly as the Fed funds rate. Now we're going to do how we did on predictions or forecasts. What we were trying to do here is replicate something that a guy named Byron Wien did for many years, unfortunately deceased now, where he put 10 things down that might happen, but which would be surprises. So with that as a introduction to what we've done in the past, if what we predicted didn't happen during 25, we have the ability, I think, under our pattern here to say, well, it didn't happen in 25, but it may happen in 26. We can add new elements, or we can say we were just wrong. So with that as a lead in, Jason's going to lead us through where we were predicting or however we want to characterize it this time last year. Over to you, Jason.
Sure. I think we said 10-ish surprises for last year, but we really had about 15. I guess where I would start is we suggested that Saudi Arabia may shift to a market share production.
Yeah, that more or less happened in that they did start to increase their supply without any evidence that the demand had increased by the amount their supply increased. So, I mean, it's a weak market, an oversupplied market, and they're saying they won't increase production till the first quarter of this year. But I do think they're getting tired of ceding market share. So I think that's another kind of trend we're going to see this year. Look, the Saudis will overproduce more than the market really needs, which is in effect gaining some of their market share back.
We suggested that the new incoming Trump administration would free up some of the blocks that the Biden administration had placed on LNG projects. So safe to say that came to fruition as well.
Absolutely.
Some of the newer predictions that we had were, and this one was mine, that a private company would achieve nuclear fusion ignition this year. So it's only been achieved by a US national laboratory. There's a lot of well-funded startups going after this goal, but none have achieved that nuclear fusion ignition being producing more energy out of the reaction than was put into the reaction. There's one company that seems like they're the furthest along called Commonwealth Fusion, and they are targeting 2027 for this milestone. So we'll see. That's something I want to roll over. The next prediction was kind of an interesting one, that one of the three of us would switch from an iPhone to an Android phone. I think it was expected that it would be me that switched. It turns out that both Mike and I, on the other hand, each purchased 2 iPhones in 2025. So the exact opposite occurred.
Yeah. The stock is 70 or 80 points higher too, by the way.
Right.
Apple has a recovery.
Another prediction was that Apple would be blocked from paying Google the $20 billion in royalties to be the default search product on iPhones. That did occur. But at the same time, Google largely got off the hook pretty easily from Judge Mehta's ruling on the antitrust cases. So it did occur, but Google came out unscathed. Our next prediction was that you would be able to interact with a Tesla car through voice command. That did occur. They did release a software update where you can control a lot of functions within the vehicle through voice. I think if we were to continue this, we'll see that the robo-taxi interface could possibly be more voice controlled once you arrive to the vehicle. So you'll book it through a mobile app like Uber, but when you're in the vehicle, then most things will be voice command. Another autonomous driving prediction that we had was that we will see a national framework for autonomous vehicles created. Nothing on that front yet. A lot of talk at the time a year ago was around the patchwork of state regulations and state DMVs okaying the use of both Waymo and Tesla's self-driving technology, now robotaxi. That patchwork largely remains today. The opposite kind of prediction that we had was that there would be a tepid uptake of AI product. This one's kind of hard to categorize. The growth in demand for tokens and chat applications has continued its exponential growth, but we're not seeing real business cases for it yet in a lot of markets. We use it quite often at Top Mark Capital, and we use it for production of this podcast. But I think I would say that did come true, and we're not seeing a lot of real business cases for AI yet. We kind of thought Copilot would have a faster uptake. They're selling a lot of Copilot licenses. However, it may not be used extensively. I think workers might be reluctant to fully adopt it in fear that it does replace their jobs. Any thoughts there?
I think maybe we're reaching the limit of where the chat-based interface for AI applications benefit businesses. I think the next wave, and part of what we'll see in the next year, is more adoption in enterprise. It takes longer to push a project through a Fortune 500 company. You'll have to do a pilot, you test, maybe you iterate a few times until you have something that's actually production ready. So I think 26 will be a really interesting year for enterprise artificial intelligence use cases. It's very similar to, not to get too far off track, but it's very similar to when early CRM systems were implemented. People were very reluctant to put their, especially if you're a salesperson, right, put the contact information for your network into the company CRM, because that was thought to be your IP, if you will, your competitive edge. And as companies have adopted it, it's become more commonplace. But you're gonna have a similar thing with companies changing the way they operate using some of these AI tools. So, and that'll be a time thing.
Another prediction was, our 12th prediction was the generative AI algorithms may replace social media influencers. That didn't occur. There are certainly social media channels that are entirely AI produced now that have large followings, but I think it's safe to say that influencers still have a viable business today.
I'd agree with that, but I would also say that there's a lot of AI-based influencers. And then the top influencers in social media, whether it's YouTube or X or Instagram, they're using a lot more AI-generated content. So this is one of those things where more begets more, right? The kind of a Jevons paradox. It's going to be cheaper to produce higher quality content, and that will probably lead to more people doing social media marketing, influencer marketing. So
And
it's kind of a leading use case for some of this stuff.
And that's where I'm seeing a lot of impact is the content, not necessarily influencers and that kind of content, but short form stories told through multiple videos. That kind of content is exploding through AI generation. We had the prediction that an AI will have designed an FDA approved drug. As far as I know, that has not occurred. However, I'm kind of reluctant to continue this prediction for the next year because so many molecules are being designed with the aid of AI tools. So we've seen AlphaFold successfully predict the folding patterns of proteins based on their structure, the molecular structure. And I think those tools are being used for most early stage research at this point today. So where do you draw the line to say that it was designed by AI versus AI was an integral tool being used in the designing of a drug? I think it's just a matter of time. Something aided by AI design will be approved in the next 1 to 3 years.
Yeah, I'd take the 1 year there, Jason, that you know much more about it, but it just seems to be moving more quickly than than we could have imagined last year at this time.
Right. Just clinical trials take a long time. I think that's you have to prove they're safe and effective, and that's the holdup. For good reason. Another prediction was the FDA will expand the use of in-silico experiments in order to accelerate drug development and clinical study. That one did come true. That one did occur. This was Mike's prediction. He nailed it. The FDA recently produced an order they want to reduce the amount of animal testing that occurs and rely more on AI modeling of drug interactions in early stage chemistry in the body for humans, because in a lot of cases, animal study does not directly apply to how a drug will be metabolized in the human body and the effect on the human body. So they are moving to a lot more AI modeling in order to reduce animal studies. Another prediction was that RFK would be confirmed and subsequently ban the use of corn syrup in our food supply. He's started making changes, particularly around petroleum-based dyes being used in food. And surprisingly, the food companies, the processed food companies are proactively making a lot of changes, but we have not seen banning corn syrup. There's a lot of subsidies on corn production and corn syrup, even though it's banned largely across the world.
Yeah, I think unfortunately they've just got even lower hanging fruit than that to work on in the food supply.
Hunt had the prediction that the US will go from a $7 trillion in expenses to $6.5 trillion in expenses, and the goal being to save $500 billion on the US balance sheet. That kind of came true. Expenses didn't come down, but revenues were up. So we did achieve that $500 billion in savings. So that was a maybe.
$500 billion of savings and spending didn't happen. You can look at Exhibit A. We were about flat spending, but as Jason said, the revenue came up. I do think to continue, because we have the right to continue, I think our practice is we can continue into the next year. I think we might get maybe not $500 billion reduction in spending, but one of the things we're just talking about interest is running about $1 trillion. They will do their refunding short, so they might save $200 billion or so in interest in fiscal 27 versus 26. So I think I'll sit there with a kind of a modified prediction saying it happened, but it happened on the revenue front, and there should be some reduction in spending from the $7 trillion level.
Agreed. Another prediction is probably a good thing that it didn't occur. The Federal Reserve would have to come to the rescue for some sort of economic problem. So good that surprise did not happen. Similarly, we suggested a Treasury bond auction may fail. At the time, a year ago, we said we're comfortable in agreeing that it probably won't happen. But Hunt, you suggested that the 10-year rate would continue to move higher even if the Fed funds rate were to be reduced by 50 basis points. So at the time that we made that prediction, I think the 10-year was around 4.6, 4.5%. It did trade up over 5, but then spent most of the year heading back down. Mike made the bold prediction that China would reunify with Taiwan in this past year. That did not occur.
We can roll that one forward.
Yeah.
We can.
Yeah. He rolls it forward enough years, it'll happen.
An interesting one is the first $1 billion single person company would be created. I think it's pretty safe to say that did not occur. However, just this past week, Jan LeCun announced that he is raising money for a yet to be incorporated startup. He is an AI pioneer and was the lead AI researcher at Meta for a number of years. He since left Meta. Everyone anticipated him to start a startup, and now he's fundraising for it. He's attempting to raise $500 million at a $3 billion valuation. It's him and one hire as the CEO. So potentially a $3 billion one-person company, even though they're not operational.
Yeah, I don't know if that totally counts, but I see.
I think that's pretty close. One person in a system at 3 billion sounds pretty equivalent to one person in a billion.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it for our last year's predictions.
Now we've got like about 5 minutes left, so I think we're going to have to carry this forward next week. I think what we ought to do, we ought to start with the ones we made, which ones we think we want to drop rather than roll over. And then I'm sure between the three of us, we'll have, a few new ones.
Absolutely.
I'll probably want to do something on how many shadow fleet tankers the U.S. will board in state controllers. I'm thinking about 15 or 20. That may have a full week to think about it. Go ahead.
Thoughts around quantum computing that I'll discuss next week.
Yeah.
And I've got all sorts of controversial takes.
Maybe what we have to do for discipline, maybe we have to say they're no more than 20. So if we want to add some, we have to deduct some. Otherwise, when we get to the end of 26, there won't be enough time to cover everything in one 30-minute period. They have to limit it to 20. So why do we make it a rule?
True.
If any of us want to have new ones, we have to deduct one of the ones that we made last year and would otherwise roll over.
That sounds good to me.
Christmas and New Year's happening on Thursday. These I think will be quiet news weeks. So we'll have plenty of time to see whether we can compress existing ones so that we can hold the total to 20 next week. In the meantime, everyone have a good holiday period and be well and stay healthy. Thanks very much for listening. Take care.
The views expressed on this podcast are the host alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the hosts nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to and no reliance should be placed on the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The hosts and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned.